The subjunctive in Italian is a grammatical mood that uses verbs to express an attitude toward an action, such as things that are felt, doubted, desired, judged, or perceived. Linguistically, it doesn't tell us when something happens, but how the speaker feels about it. In these final Italian lessons, I will explain how all variations of the subjunctive work in Italian, but the method will be different, starting with the present subjunctive in Italian. Before learning its formation, it's important to grasp what the subjunctive even is. The subjunctive mood is in a world of reality as an idea, meaning that events may or may not happen in general, thereby creating uncertainty or possibility. If the indicative says, this is, factually, the subjunctive says, this may be, when it can be open to any possibility. The psychology of the mood can appear in sentences where two people's realities are in tension. So, it's the grammar of influence that expresses a subject's attempt to change reality, using emotion, opinion, doubt, desire, judgment, or any other possibility that gives the idea of uncertainty. While such concepts can be good, more often than not, they simply condense the most common uses of the subjunctive, but they don't actually explain what the subjunctive is. This is why I've chosen this approach of teaching the subjunctive first, because it's a mood that represents something more subtle. Conceptually, it's the mood of possibility and uncertainty, so it expresses something that may or may not be real in general. We can collect all of these ideas, put them in many sentences, and see them more reasonably. All of these phrases have the idea of uncertainty, because we don't know if they will happen, and that's why it's called the subjunctive. By saying or simply thinking about these sentences, they all express a possibility that may or may not happen. The fact that a possibility can happen in general is what activates the subjunctive, regardless of what it is. If I express any of these sentences, it doesn't actually mean that these things will happen, and therefore, it creates possibility. The point is that all of these expressions, whether it's will, emotion, doubt, or desire, are all uncertain, thereby opening a possibility. This is the true definition of the subjunctive, not just in Italian, but in any language. Think of it as a bridge between minds, where in Italian, it can be even more specific. Another technique that can be used to understand the subjunctive is the word che. Italian uses the subjunctive mainly after che, because it's activated when one clause depends on another's mental stance. One person's belief, desire, or emotion, and another person's potential action. This concept will be way more logical later in the video. As a cultural and linguistic note, the subjunctive in Italian is more understandable than in English, because the grammar makes it more clear. Since Italian is more expressive, it allows the speaker to acknowledge subjectivity and to avoid declaring something as absolute truth when it's only a perception. Now, after this explanation, we can finally see the present subjunctive in Italian, il congiuntivo presente. To conjugate verbs in this mood, we follow a pattern of a main clause plus che plus the subjunctive, but sometimes the mood will appear in different phrases, which I will show later. For now, we can understand how to conjugate verbs, following two similar patterns, depending on the verb type. Are, ere, ire. For regular are verbs, the pattern follows different endings, where we take an infinitive, drop the ending, and add the following endings. I for io, tu, lui, lei. Iamo for noi. Iate for voi. And ino for loro. For regular ere and ire verbs, some endings are identical, so they're borrowed. However, we have to use the ending a for io, tu, lui, lei, and hanno for loro. To know this pattern more, we can see that a switch of vowels happens in some subjects. So, this is how we conjugate verbs in the present subjunctive, and these endings apply to all verbs. Let's see the verb parlare, to speak. To conjugate it in the congiuntivo presente, we take the infinitive, drop the ending, and add the subjunctive endings that match every subject. Once again, make sure that the action is in the stance of uncertainty. Io parli, tu parli, lui, lei parli. Parliamo, parliate, parlino. Although Italian conjugations are sufficient in showing the subject, in the subjunctive, parli is a repeated conjugation, so it's better to say it with the subject pronoun. Now, let's see a different verb, like credere, to believe. To conjugate this verb, take the infinitive, drop the ending, and add the endings that match the subjects. Because subjunctive endings are identical, we can just keep them in mind, except for io, tu, lui, lei, and loro that use a. Io creda, tu creda, lui, lei creda. Crediamo, crediate, credano. Now, let's see the verb dormire, to sleep. To conjugate this verb, take the infinitive, drop the ending, and add the endings that match the subjects. Io dorma, tu dorma, lui, lei dorma. Dormiamo, dormiate, dormano. So, this is how we conjugate verbs in the present subjunctive, but we also have to see irregular verbs. Because Italian has many, it's impossible to list them all. So here, we can see a chart that has the most common ones, but you can definitely find others. In such a case, we don't need to show the individual conjugations of every verb, because all we do is memorize the irregular forms and add the corresponding endings to the subject we decide to use, which apply to all verbs. So, we can remember the endings that I showed before and add them to the forms of any of these verbs. Essere, sia, avere, abbia, andare, vada, dare, dia, fare, faccia, stare, stia, sapere, sappia, venire, venga, uscire, esca, potere, possa, dovere, debba, volere, voglia. After fully learning how to conjugate regular and irregular verbs in this mood, we can have some examples, and here you will really see the idea of uncertainty. Penso che tu abbia ragione. Spero che lui venga. Non credo che sia vero. Sono felice che tu sia qui. Voglio che tu faccia attenzione. The formation of some phrases in English may seem weird, but I rephrase them like that so that you can see the word order in Italian. What all of these sentences have in common is the idea of uncertainty, but they're expressed in different ways, whether it's emotion, doubt, necessity, desire, or even a negation. One of the main concepts that creates uncertainty is doubt, using the following phrases, but at the same time, negative opinions also activate the mood. Dubito che loro vengano. Moreover, we can compare subjunctive sentences with factual expressions in the indicative. This way, the meaning is more understandable. For instance, opinions and thoughts trigger the mood because they make a fact a belief. Lui ha ragione is a fact, while Credo che lui abbia ragione is a belief that I express as a speaker. The same is true about wishes and desires, like saying, voglio che tu vada. Because I have a different subject, I create the subjunctive. With the same subject, I would have the indicative. Voglio andare is a fact, while voglio che tu vada is a belief. Additionally, impersonal constructions also take the subjunctive because of the same concept, like saying, è importante che tu studi. Considering this concept, the subjunctive can activate even after some conjunctions, because they become part of a separate clause when used in context. Prima che, affinché, benché, a meno che, purché. An example is, ti chiamo prima che tu parta. Overall, this is how the congiuntivo presente fully works in Italian. The main rule to know is the difference between something presented as a fact or uncertainty, so in the final Italian videos, we'll see how all subjunctives are formed in the language.